guy by the name of Billy. He's really a wonderful soul, sort of the type of person who's, you meet him and you realize he's built from a different mold. The first time we met him, it was for some work we were doing, and we said to him, drop by the house anytime. The next morning we saw him, he was sitting in our hammock in the backyard. We loved it. He's the type of guy who just takes life on and is fully honest. And so we saw him and asked him what he was up to. He said one of the new things that he started is when he wakes up in the morning, he does this sort of physical routine. He throws his arms up in the air and he brings them down and he beats them on his chest. Then he takes his feet and starts stomping. He's a musician, so he has a lot more rhythm than me. But he sort of has this understanding of what it means to be in tune and in rhythm. And so he created this beat that he does every morning, which I can only imagine him, what it looks like in the morning. He said for his wife, it's a little strange when she turns and sees that he's sort of marching around the house, beating his chest and stomping on the floor. But this is what he's made his routine in the morning, this throwing his arms up in the air, this stomping of his feet and beating his chest. And he does that around the house until I imagine he gets his coffee, goes to the bathroom, sort of wakes up. It struck me as I was approaching tonight this talk that those of you who are like Billy and wake up and beat your chest and dance in the morning, this talk is not for you. You already know the message that I hope I pass along this evening, that you've already found what Billy taught me, what my trip, which I'll share, my trip to the mikveh taught me. But the rest of us, I'm willing to bet the vast majority of us, we continue to have alarm clocks that sound like drunk fire engines, and we prefer to put our feet into slippers, not to march on the floor first thing in the morning and make a lot of noise. So what Billy understands that I learned when I went to the mikveh is that physical rituals, like dancing in the morning or dipping your head underwater, they have this ability to shine a light on the raw events of our life and to infuse a sense of meaning that perhaps we're often too afraid to allow into our life. Or perhaps we just, out of apathy or out of being too busy, we allow them to pass us by with little acknowledgement. Rituals like this, making our bodies a physical part of our rituals, they create a space, a time in our lives that I worry we too often give away as though it has no meaning. The rabbis in our tradition, like Billy, believe deeply that our bodies and our souls are directly connected. There's a midrash where they liken the relationship of the body to the soul to that of two friends, one who's blind and one who's lame. Separated from each other, neither can walk or eat or enjoy life to its fullest. But together, the blind friend can carry the lame to the beauties of the world. The lame can describe these beauties to the man who cannot see. So too with our souls and our bodies, the rabbis say. The body is physically aware, but it's severely limited if its actions are not connected to our souls. The soul is emotionally in tune, but unable to express itself without the body. In not so many words, this is the message that my peers in rabbinical school shared with me as we approached ordination, as they invited me to the mikveh. Josh, Dan said, John and I are thinking about going to the mikveh next week before ordination. Would you like to go with us? Before I share what I thought in that moment, let me explain that a mikveh is a Jewish ritual bath. It dates back to biblical times. It's one of our oldest rituals. Up until the past century, it was almost entirely used in the Orthodox tradition, and especially after the Holocaust. It fell out of practice largely. But in the last few decades, it's become more popular, particularly in progressive circles. And so progressive Jews in many cities around our country have been building their own mikvahs and finding a meaningful way to mark transitions in their lives by immersing in the mikvah. So now, let's return to when Dan and John asked me to join them at the mikvah. I thought to myself as I approached the end of my 6 years of study in rabbinical school, is he really inviting me to sit in a room with other naked men in hopes of having some supernatural experience after all this study. Is this what I've really done all this work for? The discomforts, the unusual nature of this ritual didn't sit well with me. And of course, there was the inherent vulnerability of being there in a robe in front of classmates who, other than professionally, I really didn't know that well. It's not exactly what I envisioned the end of rabbinical school would be. But I thought, who was I to judge? So I said, sure, why not? And so the following week, Dan, John, and I went together to the community mikveh in Los Angeles. And we asked Rabbi Richard Levy, our professor and beloved mentor, to facilitate the ritual. So at his request, each of us prepared a short text study and a few personal words for the ceremony. But let me explain that this mikveh is one of the shining examples of the rebirth of this ritual. It's not the simple hole in the ground filled with rainwater like its biblical ancestors that you can go visit in Israel and see what people did thousands of years ago. It's more of a Jewish spiritual spa. We walked in for our hour-long appointment and changed into the white terry cloth robes provided by the mikveh lady, which is her official title. The mikveh was housed in a large room beautifully tiled with mosaics. On one side of the room were 4 chairs facing each other just as we requested. The lights were dimmed, the mood was set for us to go through this intimate ritual together. We entered, each of us, with our anxieties and discomforts somewhat evident. Then, seated in our chairs, in our robes, we began to talk. We began to teach each other the texts that we chose. And Rabbi Levy began to ask us questions. What was the most meaningful moment in rabbinical school? What are you going to do next? What would you tell a student who's about to start their time in school? What would you prepare them for in our program? We had already completed the school's exit interview questionnaire, so it was obvious that this was different. This was for our awareness, not the school's. I believe deeply that Rabbi Levy was intentionally prodding our souls, asking us, as a part of this ritual, to become aware of our accomplishments, and most importantly, to become aware of ourselves in a way that we hadn't been before. So when our conversation concluded, each of us walked to the far end of the room, hung our robe on a hook, and immersed ourselves in the water, physically marking the moment of transition with blessings and immersion. I'd love to tell you that as my head sunk below the horizon of the water, that the face of God presented itself to me. Perhaps that's what we would think we were hoping for, as if we were Moses at Sinai, that this would be some sort of a religious climax in our lives that we reached. But something else happened. It took me about an hour to realize it, but it was clear that something had happened as we had sat in that room for that discussion, as we had immersed in this mikveh. We left the mikveh room, got into our clothes, and we all went to lunch. We did something that we had never done before. We ordered wine at lunch with our teacher at his request. For whatever reason, having wine with Rabbi Levy over lunch was like running into your 3rd grade teacher at the grocery store for the first time. Our conversation was entirely different than what it had been even a day ago at school. We continued along the same lines of questions that he had asked us, but now we were asking him. We talked to him as if he were our peer, and he responded in the same way. He talked about his challenges as a rabbi, the things that bothered him as a professor, the moments that he was proud of. And he talked about how he missed Boston, where he had lived years prior, how much he enjoyed traveling, how much pleasure he had gotten out of watching his daughters grow up. I will always consider myself his student. But I will also always remember that moment as the first moment that I felt I was his colleague. The moment I felt I was finally a rabbi. Was it the mikveh itself? Probably not. But I can tell you it would not have been the same had I not participated in the transition with my full self, my body, my soul. It would have been incomplete. Later that week, we attended our ordination. It was elegant and grand, sanctuary packed with people. People came from all over the world. All of our families were there. Afterwards, my friends and family gathered to celebrate, and we walked along the beach in Santa Monica. It was exactly what I asked for. It was exactly what I imagined it would be. But looking back, I know that the mikveh experience allowed me to be in transition. not just to celebrate. It was a spiritually reflective, soul-touching body and body-touching soul experience that graduation robes and graduation cakes simply don't provide. Each of us will undoubtedly experience many changes in our lives. There will be exciting ones we look forward to, troubling ones that we dread. The mikvah reminded me that Jewish tradition is ready for our transitions. But unfortunately, too often I worry we are not prepared for them. Our bodies and our souls are deeply connected. Talk to anyone who's had cancer. Ask them if it changed their soul. Maybe use a different word. How did it affect them emotionally? What did it do to who they are as a person? Did it change their values? Talk to someone who's been through a broken relationship, a divorce, the loss of a loved one. These changes impact our entire selves. They impact our souls for sure, but I promise you, they impact our bodies as well. And so I learned that day at the mikvah that our task as Jews is to give these transitions in our lives the respect they deserve. It's to turn to our bodies and our souls when we are in transition. So I would not say that I met God per se at the mikvah, but I came face to face with my transition. And that changed my perspective. Perhaps I would say it changed my perspective on life. In many ways, it changed me, and that I would describe as godly. Perhaps some of us will go to the mikvah, perhaps some of us will not. But I hope when our next transition arrives that we will not sell ourselves short, but experience the full nature of the change before us. I hope we will push ourselves to recognize that we've accomplished what we've accomplished and how we've changed. I hope we do so emotionally, but also physically when possible. And when we reach these moments, when we face change, when we face transition, whether we immerse in a mikvah or dance around our bedroom as Billy does in the morning, let us recognize that we've taken the time in our life and made it an experience. That we've taken the transition in our life and we've made it transformative. And most importantly, we've taken the mundane in our life and we've made our best effort to make it sacred. Shabbat shalom.